Moebius. He is in the habit of taking long journeys through his mind. He puts on his explorer's outfit and goes as deep as he can inside himself. When he reaches a quiet and picturesque spot, he starts fishing with his pencil. He casts his stroke through the river of his dreams and always catches something. Proof that other worlds exist elsewhere can be found in Moebius's drawings.
Like all children, I used to draw for reasons relating to my own personal experience. Instead of giving up drawing, I kept on with it. This is what happens with most people who draw. All kids draw. All kids like to be a nuisance. All kids like to sing. Some stop, but all kids like ordering people about, and all children like to do what adults do. In the end, what we do when we're adults is to continue with aspects from our childhood, which are then perfected. We build bridges, aeroplanes, sing songs, or draw comic strips. I'm no exception. Instead of giving up drawing, I continued. Actually, I gave up everything else. I stopped singing, I stopped building bridges. When I used to draw comic strips in a classical way, in a more classical way than I do now, all the energy put into the drawings was used in trying to make my drawing look like something that had already been done in the comic style of the 50s, when Joseph Gillet was a master of the art. I didn't seek to imitate the reality. What I meant was to imitate the style. I wanted to do drawings like that. When I got hold of a photograph, I would transform it into something which resembled the classical style. Then, when I began to feel more at home in that type of drawing, I started to incorporate a kind of realism, to deal with a whole range of details, such as clothing, aspects which don't always correspond to the image of a hero as it was in the 50s. Blueberry did indeed undergo a period of physical decline, which is really very relative. In fact, this decline happened because I was more and more interested in discovering the realistic aspects. Anyone who's really gone into the Blueberry stories, who's got into the adventures which happened to Blueberry, will understand that he can't really keep up his clean, well-combed, clean-shaven appearance with the neatly pressed clothes. It just isn't possible. On the one hand, I try to follow the logical development of the story, and at the same time, Blueberry's character. Somebody who doesn't care too much about his appearance. He goes from a state of unawareness, which he finds himself in, a social structure which he sticks to, because although he may seem to protest inwardly, he continues to be passive. And from that, he turns to disobedience and defiance, questioning everything until he reaches a state of liberation. He does well in protesting, in being obstinate, because in the end, he's declared innocent. He recovers his integrity, and he can set off towards freedom. He's forever starting things. He goes from one stage to another. He goes through all the stages. That's wonderful.
Il y a toutes les étapes, voilà, c'est ça, donc c'est formidable.
When I became Moebius, I discovered I could do the same, but instead of resembling any existing style, I could make it look like something inside me and still unknown. It wasn't a well-known style, it was a style yet to be discovered. It was often an amalgamation of aspects which had been conjectured to differing degrees in classical or modern art, or in an intermediate art, I don't know, art which is not art, either advertising, comic strips, original amalgamations. Comic strips actually express more than they seem to at first sight. They're very real in the sense that drawing is a very immediate, very direct art, which puts very few veils between the ego and its expression.
Qui construit peu de voile entre le moi et l'expression de ce moi.
Even if you try to codify, even if you try to imitate any given style, such as the classical style, it's always some sort of graphology of writing. There are always graphologists to decodify those things and to see through the drawing, through revelations of fear, of wrath, of anguish, of the artist's dreams. I believe that in the same way, each reader, albeit unwittingly, is a graphologist. It's very exciting for an artist to discover those natural, pure, spontaneous aspects which he may possess. But it's also a trap. From the moment you start drawing, you're revealing your inner self. But then again, this doesn't only happen with drawing. I think it happens in any other medium of expression, whether it's music or literature. There are very few authors who dare to reveal themselves in a thoroughly shameless way. Mind you, I understand it. But on the other hand, we must consider that the comic strip is a medium of expression which covers a whole range of possibilities, from the most commercial to the most virulent personal expression. This is a personal manifesto, an important declaration of intentions. It's a program. Behind the laughter, through entertainment, through amusement, and through stimulation, there's always, in a more serious manner, a recognition of creativity, something relating to life itself. Somehow I decided, or rather I deviated, so that I moved away from the rest.
Soit je décidais, soit je pressentais que je déviais.
At that time, I wasn't looking to say anything. I only wanted to live my life doing comic strips. The pleasure of it all was enough. But unfortunately, things get spoilt, and one gets caught up in a common disease, a desire to communicate one's own ideas. If the ideas are there, of course, reading, books, living through personal experiences, and so on. You want to communicate your feelings, but then you have the problem of how to communicate so as to keep the feelings alive. When one has nothing to say, when one advances freely, I don't know if it's easy, but let's say that I have experienced this way of being alive. This can be seen in Arzach, and in the garage, and in other improvised stories. I gained a certain amount of experience in creating stories this way. The revivalist explosion in the comic strip was due to some sort of feedback between the events of May 1968, inasmuch as they took place historically, and our present situation. It can also be said that the events of May 1968 were the expression of what we were. They were also provoked by us. Both things are, once again, inextricably connected. This corresponds to me personally and my position, to the extent that, as I said a moment ago, I was Moebius, thanks to my state of mind, which was then being born, which came straight out of me, to live or to relive. I was directly connected to the state of mind which led to May 1968. It wasn't, let's create a new type of society, but rather, let's open up the house so that a new model may be found and expressed. I saw the birth of a newspaper, and I saw it develop. It was alive. First it was a baby, then a child, then a youth, an adult, and later an old man, and then a dying man, and finally a fond memory. I saw a whole lifespan. Perhaps newspapers are designed to survive for different periods. There are those which are destined to live for a century or two, and others which have a complete and harmonious life, but exist for no more than 10 years. Why not? The idea behind the garage was to establish some sort of relationship with the reader through an enigmatic attitude, through mystery. And also, of course, through humor, the irreverent use of all the known systems in the comic strip. There's a system of narrative, there's also the graphic system, and so on. Using this, amalgamating it all, playing with it like a slightly mad child, and then suddenly letting it drop in order to obtain strange figures. There was a distinct emotion, which we were fully conscious of when we were doing this. And then what I wanted was to establish some sort of tension. Throughout the story, there's some sort of dramatic tension, the source of which is in fact unknown. It's a little like what happens in music. You hear a fragment, and then suddenly there's an accumulation of tension which brings about an explosion of ecstasy. Oh, it's fantastic. Fantastic. And then, it lasts a moment, and then it all comes back to normal again. That's it. What interested me was to keep that tension within myself and also within the reader. This is by Jodorowsky. I didn't do it. I must, however, say that as we have followed the same trajectory, we do indeed share the same concerns and also the same knowledge. Although the knowledge of the nature of crystal, the nature of light, of symbolic nature, the wealth behind those themes, that's what we've done. He created a movement which is called the Panic Movement, together with Topor and Arabal. But for them, panic is not only panic, it's panic of death. It also makes reference to the god Pan, that is to say the freedom of nature, obedience to the laws of nature, to the revelation, to unconsciousness, rather than to cultural, civilized, well-provided-for structures. Pan is indeed a whimsical, sexual god who is afraid of nothing. He has all of the story in his head, practically from the beginning. In any case, he has an enormous capacity for improvisation. There I'm at a loss. Well, not really, but he has an excellent mental and psychic fertility. When we're going to make up a story, we get together for 3 or 4 days, or a week. It depends. And every day he mimes the story to me. He tells it to me in mime, playing the parts of all the actors. At first, I listen. I say nothing to begin with. Then I ask why this is so. I would prefer to do it this way or that way. Then we go into detail. Then I take down notes, and at the same time I develop the structure. The dream of flying is what affects me most. Perhaps the happiest moments of my life are when I've dreamed I was flying. It hasn't happened to me very often, only 4 or 5 times in my entire life. Going on a marvelous flight. I've seen myself flying within 10 centimeters of the ground.
m'est arrivé également de vraiment de réellement voler,
I've never experienced such complete happiness.
d'apesanteur absolue. Voilà, ça c'est vraiment le bonheur.
Those were truly wonderful
J'ai
moments.
jamais expérimenté disons, de bonheur de cette qualité-là. Disons que c'est mon top.
So, you see, it's normal that all of this appears in my stories.
Ça se retranscrive dans mes histoires. Souvent, les moments
Often, the most critical moments are accompanied by the flight of the main character.
des protagonistes. En fait, pendant des années, j'ai vécu
I've lived for many years with a kind of false impression, in fact. In any case, not a belief.
d'illusions,
At the beginning, one is young.
croyances, en tout cas,
Then one gets old,
que
and when one gets old, one loses strength, beauty, and vitality.
on perd sa force, sa beauté, sa vitalité, puis on est plus bon qu'à foutre.
Then everything goes to ruin.
On repart plus.
One dies, and that's the end of it all. It's pretty abhorrent.
C'est le truc qu'on nous met dans la tête,
But in fact,
qu'on se met dans la tête.
this is what they stuff into our heads, or what we ourselves stuff our heads with.
C'est un peu
I don't know.
Alexandro, Jodorowsky, quand on a travaillé.
About 10 years ago, while working on Dune with Alessandro Jodorowsky, I discovered someone who didn't share this belief.
En le connaissant, sans sa connaissance, j'ai vu quelqu'un
He was 10 years older than me, and in spite of that, he was younger.
il a
I began to take interest in what he had to say.
déjà. Alors j'ai commencé à m'intéresser à ce qu'il disait, je l'ai écouté et ça m'a ouvert.
I listened to him, and suddenly a new perspective appeared to me.
Il suffisait la même énergie que je mettais à vouloir.
I realized that the time I used to... I spent a disproportionate amount of energy in destroying myself, drinking and eating anything.
Buvant, fumant, mangeant n'importe quoi et en menant une vie complètement débile. Alors,
Suddenly I diverted this energy, and I reformed my life.
j'ai retourné cette énergie et j'ai tout réformé dans ma vie. Et puis c'était formidable.
Suddenly I started to get younger, something which I'd long since stopped doing.
Moi, je pense que ce qui est important, c'est
What's important is to be constantly willing to avoid following the system,
en amont de ça,
to avoid the established rules.
vraiment, d'éviter de tomber dans des systèmes, des recettes. Vous voyez,
I'd never say to myself, I'm going to exploit the theme of parallel or hypothetical worlds.
critique, moi, ce que je pense essentiel,
What's essential for me is to do things which entertain, which interest.
qui intéresse. Ça, c'est fondamental.
This is fundamental.
Et également,
To improve the standard of living in such a way that the quality of entertainment can also develop.
les qualités des amusements évoluent également. Vous comprenez que si on
If one lets oneself be led by the mediocrity of existence, one will have games that are less and less interesting to play.
intéressant, on va finir par jouer au tiercé.
One will end up doing the pools.
Les enfants ont des jeux magnifiques.
Children have wonderful games to play. Later you find them doing the pools.
Ils se sont laissés
Shit, I
tuer.
mean, what has happened to us?
Bon, alors moi,
Have
je
we
veux
lost
pas-
it?
je veux pas
Sure.
me retrouver à jouer au tiercé.
I don't
Je veux
want
que les
that.
jeux soient-
I don't want to find myself doing the pools. I want my games to become better and better and more interesting, more exciting.
grave.